Number 1. A cave. When I was younger, I believed, like a lot of young kids, that there is buried treasure out there in the world. One only needs to go and look for it in order to find it. So I would often go off in search of buried treasure. I haven't lived out in the country in several decades, but I grew up for the first 15 years of my life living out there. I grew up in a house owned by my aunt and uncle, who informally adopted me when I was very young. They owned a nice house out in the country that had been built specifically for them right after they got married. The house was built on a small piece of property surrounded by a whole lot of forest. Now, my aunt and uncle weren't really the outdoors type. They were more of the remain inside and be bookish type, and I have always had some of that in me too. But being young and reading books, especially sword and sorcery fantasy type books, made me a lot more curious about being out in the woods. So, at a fairly young age, I started exploring the area around the house. I hoped that I would find something amazing, and I guess I finally eventually did, but it definitely was not treasure. My aunt and uncle didn't have any kids until I was already a bit older, so my ventures out into the woods were normally all by myself. Occasionally a friend would stay over the weekend, and we would hike out together. Mostly though, it was just me. I had a metal detector. My aunt and uncle supported my exploration ideas, and I guess they thought that was a way for me to learn to search for things. I didn't take it out as often as I would have, though, when it didn't return immediate results for treasure. I guess I found out later that the land was owned by my uncle's grandfather, and he owned a whole lot of land, so there was plenty to explore. When I was 13 years old, I was out on a weekend by myself. I came across a stream that I wasn't familiar with, and I began following it. Eventually, I was surprised when I came across a cave in the side of one of the hills. My mind immediately thought about gold, so I decided to go in and check the cave out. Even though I was curious, I was also pretty cautious at first. At the time, I was scared of bats or other things that could hide out in the caves. But no matter how cautious I was trying to be, my curiosity got the better of me, and I slowly crept into the cave. I moved further into the cave, and it was so much darker than I had expected it to be. I didn't bring a flashlight with me, but I had a little light-up keychain, so I fished that out of my pocket, and I shined it into the cave. It really didn't do much good, but I felt so much better with the tiny bit of light, so I kept it on. I went deeper into the cave, but very slowly. I kept looking at the ceiling to see if there were any bats up there, but I didn't see any. Still, I kept looking several times. Up and down, I went with the light, keeping an eye on where I was going and what was above me. Then, on one of the times that I shined the meager light into the cave, I thought that I noticed some movement. I immediately forgot all about the bats, and my focus was on what I had seen. It could have been a rat or something, but it looked like whatever it was had moved away really quickly. I kept shining the light in every direction that I could. Finally, after a few moments, I caught some movement again. I noticed that there was some sort of mass up ahead, against one of the walls of the cave. There was something there, and it was moving too. I froze, wondering what kind of animal it could be. But then, there was a reflection of light that I guessed were eyes. The eyes didn't glow, however, like most animal eyes do when light is shined in them. So I was scared, thinking that there was a person right in the cave with me, which in a way was even scarier than an animal. The mass moved, and I was able to see a little bit more features. I heard what sounded like some really weird croaking noise. and I felt really scared. "Come closer," I heard a really hoarse voice croak. I mean, it wasn't exactly very clear, but I'm pretty sure that is what was said. So there was definitely a person in the cave with me, and it was someone I definitely didn't want to come any closer to. So I turned and I ran out of the cave. I slid on the hill once or twice, trying to make it back to the stream, so I could follow it back to an area I was more familiar with. I wasn't worried about the person coming after me, because they seemed like they weren't up for it. It became scarier as time went on, however. I often thought of that person whenever I was around in the dark and worried. I thought of the person being in my closet, under my house, and in the basement. The memory of what I came across scared me over and over whenever I noticed anything in the dark that I couldn't make out. Number 2. The Cabin. I was on a nature hike with my girlfriend. There was a well-known, in my area at least, hiking area. The whole hike was meant to take place over a period of just over 4 days. You could pitch a tent if you wanted to, but there were also communal cabins that you could stay in overnight. But of course, they weren't just restricted for you and your party. Any hikers could sleep there, and as many people as could possibly fit. We had done this hike several times before, and it was one of our most looked forward to events of the year. We also planned on spending more than the 4 days there, so we would also spend some extra time at the cabins. Normally we went in the off-season, so there weren't as many people there as there might normally be. That would mean we would definitely have a bunk to sleep in, and wouldn't have to sleep on the floor. There had been a few times that we went hiking that we had a cabin all to ourselves. The first night in the first cabin, we were the only people who were there when we finally decided to go to sleep. However, during the night, a single hiker came into the cabin, and although they were being quiet, I woke up. I was sleeping on the outside of my bed, so I opened my eyes up a little. The guy didn't turn the lights on, but he simply chose a bed that was right across from ours. Then, he sat down on the bed, and appeared to be staring right at us. The guy made me uncomfortable, and at first, I just tried to go back to sleep. However, I could still feel him staring at us while I had my eyes closed. So to prove myself wrong, and so that I could finally go back to sleep, I opened my eyes. When I did, I noticed that he was still sitting on the bed, and he still appeared to be staring at us. This made me very uncomfortable, and it was really hard for me to get back to sleep. Eventually, though, I must have drifted off. However, when I woke up in the morning, there was no one in the cabin except for me and my girlfriend. I chose not to mention it to my girlfriend because she was the sort who would get very creeped out by such a thing. On the 3rd day of our hike, we decided to remain at the cabin we were at for the whole day. It had the nicest interior and the nicest surrounding area, so we wanted to just go ahead and take it easy. There was another young couple at that cabin who must have had the same idea that we had and remained there too. They were nice to talk to, so we were happy to have the company. I especially was happy that they were there in case that other person would show up to the cabin that night, though I thought it was unlikely. I wouldn't have even mentioned what had happened at the other cabin, except that while the other guy and I were having a few drinks outside, he kept seeing someone who was way off trail. When I finally noticed it, I was a bit confused as well. Someone was wandering back and forth in the woods, apparently not going in any real direction. While watching, we would see him appear on one side of the woods, and then the other side, and back again. I had no real reason to think anything was wrong, but I went ahead and told the other guy about what I had seen. I just wanted him and his wife to be prepared if they ran into the creep, regardless of whether it was the same guy that we were seen wandering around in the woods. Both of us couples remained in the cabin and planned on resuming the hike the following morning. We were eventually joined by a pretty big guy who was hiking alone. He wasn't very talkative and didn't accept the drink when we offered it. Basically, when he arrived, he climbed into the top bed of one of the bunks, took out a book, and read it until eventually turning away and falling off to sleep. We were very concerned that this was the guy, but again, me and the guy from the other couple kept it to ourselves. I woke up in the middle of the night because I heard some weird noises. The best way I can describe it is that it sounded like a dog was panting. I had to wait for a few moments for my eyes to adjust before I began looking around the room, and when they did adjust, I noticed something really weird. In the bunk beds right across from us, where the married couple were sleeping, there was a figure crouched down over them. I could immediately tell that the panting noises were coming from that figure, so my first thought was that it was the man who had come in by himself, and he must have been doing something obscene over the married couple. I shook my girlfriend awake, because I didn't want to be the only one witnessing that. She looked, but since I was trying to be quiet, I could not alert her to what she would be seeing. She gasped when she noticed it. The crouched figure obviously heard the gasp, and the panting noise stopped. He slowly rose to his feet. Then he turned around and took a few steps toward the bed that we were sleeping in. He was a huge and intimidating figure, and I was pretty scared at first. He stood there in the darkness, looking at us for a few moments. I then heard a thudding sound, and then I noticed something else. The guy who had been in the cabin by himself was not the guy who was hovering over us, because that guy had just slid out of his bunk and onto his feet. The figure turned and looked at him too. Then quickly the figure turned again and then ran out of the door of the cabin. The single guy ran to the door after him, but did not follow him out of the door. He turned the light on and woke the other couple up. We explained to them what we had witnessed. Needless to say, no one got much sleep the rest of the night, but the figure didn't come back. We also had no idea who it could be, nor did we see him again. The following day we finished the hike, reported what happened, and left the hiking site. We didn't see anything else weird on the way out. Number 3. Camping. I have been hiking so many times in my life that I cannot begin to tell you how much. It's been a part of my routine since I was a kid and I lived out in the country. You would think that with all the scary stories going around that happen when people are out on hikes, that it would be nothing but a pure horror fest. However, there was only one time that anything remotely scary ever happened to me while out on a hike. 2 friends and I were planning on an undefined amount of time on a hiking and camping trip. Sometimes we would just head out and see where the wind would take us, so to speak. We were in our mid-20s at the time and pretty experienced campers all around. We were hiking in an area that we were in for the first time. We had driven and parked in a local camping area, although all of us knew we would end up going off trail. Everything went fine for the first couple of days. However, after a few nights, my friend Terry began to tell me he thought there was someone out in the woods watching us at night. He claimed he had heard someone walking around out there, and it had been keeping him from being able to sleep. This happened for a few nights in a row, and it was difficult to dismiss. Terry would have known if it was an animal that he had been hearing, and he definitely was not a paranoid kind of person. So the following night I stayed awake in my tent, listening to see if I could hear anything. The third night, I heard what Terry had told me he had heard, so I got out of my tent and shined my flashlight around, trying to see if there was anyone out there. I called out a few times, which was silly to expect someone snooping around to answer, and of course there was no response. Terry joined me in looking around, but neither of us were able to find anyone. For the next few nights, things were different. We didn't hear anything out of the ordinary, and we wrote it off as being other off-trail hikers, who were probably as concerned about us being there as we were about them. The following day, though, Terry kept stopping us as we were hiking alongside the river that ran through the area. He kept looking at the other side of the river, into the woods of the hill on that other side. He would occasionally look over there and then stop, take out his binoculars and scan the area. When I asked Terry what he was doing, he told me that he thought that he kept seeing something over there. He described it as a flash of light, as if someone were using binoculars as well, and the sun shined off of them. However, whenever he pulled out his own and took a look over there, he was unable to see anything. I wasn't convinced that it was anything, and told him that he needed to quit worrying and just enjoy himself. He then tried to make it seem like he was taking my advice, but I could tell that he was still worried. A couple days later, I woke up in the morning. I started to make some breakfast for all of us to eat. My other buddy came out of his tent, but we noticed then that Terry's tent was opened. Looking into it, we didn't see him in it. We were worried, but we didn't go looking for him right away. However, when he didn't show up after an hour or two, we went looking for him. We called out for him and searched for him everywhere, but we were unable to find him. We eventually packed everything up and began searching for any sign of him. However, after searching for a long time, we were still unable to find anything. After another day of not seeing any sign of Terry, we realized that we had to go and get help. That also required us admitting that we had gone onto private property, but that was little to risk in order to find our friend. It was about a week after that in which Terry finally showed up at the main office of the park. He was delirious and dehydrated. We ended up meeting him at the hospital that he was taken to. It took a while before he was able to tell us anything. He didn't remember a whole lot about what had happened. All he was able to tell us was that he had seen something that morning and went in search of it and had gotten lost. He then came upon some compound in the middle of the woods. He told us there were a lot of armed people around the compound and it had freaked him out, so he tried to hide. However, he said he had blacked out after that. When Terry came to, he had no idea where he was. He spent days wandering around in the woods before he finally was able to find his way out. He figured that he stumbled upon some sort of militia, and that they had knocked him out and then dropped him off somewhere, far from the compound. He figured they didn't keep him there or kill him because they didn't want to draw attention to themselves. Now, Terry had a concussion, so really I don't know what happened, but he always stood by his story that he had come across something he shouldn't have come across, and always felt he was lucky to get out alive. Hey all, Killer Orange Cat here. First, I want to thank all my paid Patreon subscribers, starting with my two VIPs, Chiamerah Cat and Pixie Hopper 8. I also want to thank Heidi H, Chronic J, Sneaky News, EricaOdd, Tracy Sellars, Kelli Clark, and Broken Angel. I hope you enjoy these hiking stories. I really like the first one a lot. I think that one actually creeped me out a little bit. I'm going to have a new Patreon video out tomorrow. The audio of that video will be available for all paid members, but all free members will be able to read the story because I'll include the text for all free members. In the meantime, if you like this video, please let me know by hitting the like button. If you're not already subscribed to Killer Orange Cat and you'd like to be, please hit the subscribe button and the bell so you'll be notified of new videos. Leave me a comment, which I'll do my best to get back to, and share the video with someone you think might enjoy it. If you have an original story you want narrated on Killer Orange Cat, please send it to the address included in the description. And now I'd like to mention all my free Patreon members: Anthony Bowers, Remi, Venikins, Rose Metro, Woofer McWooferson, Cindy Cleveland, Vanapira Rayne, William H., Alien Unicorn 13, Kathryn Lynch, The Bama Guy 334, Michael Vasquez, Bonnie Lynn, Collet Bond, Krista Pike, Prince UVA, HF Creations, Bonnie Gibbs, Linda Moore, DJ Lira, Evil Black Cat, Lori Hicks, Lisa Herman, Krystal Robin, Hillbilly 13, RhettSchall, John Tull, Baby and Baby, Sherry Hubbard, and Vina Waldren. But most importantly, don't forget to check in your closet and check under your bed, because you never know where Killer Orange Cat might be hiding. Good night.